Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Enablement Expert Series. I'm very excited for today's topic because it is a very important one in both succeeding in a role and getting hired for the role. And so I brought along a guest today who I want to have really go deep on this topic, but we're talking about how does enablement earn a seat at the table? Because what I can tell you with absolute certainty, if you're in the enablement role, you don't have a seat at the table, you're going to struggle and or fail. And conversely, if you're interviewing for a role as, say, head of enablement, you need to understand, will you have a seat at the table or do you have to earn it? Or is it going to be the deck stacked against you? What does that landscape look like? And so it's a really important topic to understand, how to earn it, how to keep it, and the importance of doing that. And so I invited Kelly Lewis with us today. And I will just say, I was talking to her a couple of weeks ago, and this topic of earning a seat at the table came up. And I was like, oh, we have to talk more about this because it's so important. So maybe, Kelly, just introduce yourself to the few people who don't know you yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, thanks for having me. I am Kelly Lewis. I am co-founder and principal consultant at the Revenue Insiders, which is thought leadership and advising and consulting services for go-to-market. So we focus on everything from enablement to RevOps to everything in between.
I love it. It's a lot of work to be done. So I want to dive into this topic and let's start with the ideal. Okay, let's just start with a perfect world. So how should enablement work with its revenue leaders?
So this is really simple to me. You should be one of the first advisors that your revenue leaders go to when they're thinking through a new strategy, they're thinking through a challenge, and they want to know, what is the field thinking about? Or how could I tackle this problem? What am I not thinking about today? Or is this a great idea or am I messing up here? And so I know if I have a really good relationship, if I'm on speed dial,
Hmm.
I want them picking up the phone, calling me on a regular basis. We're texting, we're slacking. I am that advisor to them. Um, the chief of staff role has gotten really popular recently, and I almost think in a lot of cases, the head of enablement is somewhat of a chief of staff in that they are embedded within the field organization. They know the pulse of what's going on and they're aware of all the different projects that are happening and how to make the field go through those changes and handle that behavior change at scale.
I think that is so spot on. And I've often told people, enablement leaders specifically, that if you feel like you're the chief of staff, you're doing your job properly. Right?
Yeah.
That's almost like it's a gut thing if you don't have the title. But if you feel like I'm being pulled into every strategic meeting for every big decision or every big problem, that tells you something. And I think in the chief of staff, maybe not in title, but in sort of spirit of what you're working on is a very telling thing.
Totally. I have a book that I have every single one of my enablement team members read, and it's called Impact Players. It's by Liz Wiseman.
Hmm.
It's an amazing book. She wrote Multipliers. She's written other books, but
One
I
of my
love
favorite books, by the way, Multipliers. Love that book.
so good. Great for people leaders. But Impact Players is great for everyone just starting off in your career, advanced in your career, but it really talks about how you find areas to make impact within your organization that will grow your career. And I love this for leaders because a lot of getting that relationship with your sales leader that I just talked about is not easy. It doesn't just happen overnight. There's a lot of trust that comes from that. And the way I do that is very simple and it's very thoughtful. I hear something on a call, and maybe I didn't get a chance to mention it on the call to the larger group, but I'll text my CRO and say, hey, this came up on the call. One other thing we should think about is this.
Hmm.
And just start those slow conversations. Send a Slack message. Hey, really like this idea. What if we also did this? And just start throwing out those one off ideas so that individual understands that you're thinking more, not just your remit, but you're thinking about the success of the organization as a whole. And you're creating those trust moments. And as soon as you start creating those trust moments, they'll start to reciprocate it. So don't do it in an annoying way. Don't
Yeah.
just say things to say things. But when you have something that you think could be really valuable, just start having that relationship with those senior executives and those people that you're working with so that you can create that trust.
And I think we'll unpack more of those tactics as we get farther in the conversation. But I think you're onto something very big there. So that was the ideal of how it should work. We should feel like we're chiefs of staff. We should feel very important and trusted and valued. Reality is not always that. So for a lot of folks, what's reality look like?
So, unfortunately, I still think there's a misunderstanding of what enablement is in the role we play. There are, and don't get me wrong, there are very strategic revenue leaders who have worked with great enablement leaders and they've created that partnership. They've seen the results and they're bought in.
Yep.
There are a lot of revenue leaders who haven't. They have worked with teams where enablement was really just reactionary. And it was oftentimes sales training, rolling out a new methodology, helping roll out a new press release, basic product launch training information, but not skills. And in those situations, those revenue leaders, it's not that they don't want to work with you, they just don't understand what we do. And
Yes.
so it is very much part of our job to understand, help them understand what we do. The way I always do that, and this is another tip and trick, is to write a charter for your organization. So important. RevOps has a charter, marketing has a charter. Why wouldn't enablement have a charter? Um, and you need to be able to write that charter and then give an elevator pitch of what your charter is to those revenue leaders around you so that they're not going to read a 20-page document, but
Hmm.
someone might. And once you write it, you're going to be able to really crisply define what it is you do. But yeah, the reality is a lot of times sales leaders think about enablement as sales support. And so it's the, oh, we need someone to do something. Go ask enablement. And they're not bringing enablement to the table to say, here's the challenges. How do you think we should solve them?
I think that's spot on. There's a metaphor I've used a million times. I'll share it again today because I think it's apt. So I play guitar and I play guitar terribly. I can have a great guitar and I hack away at it and it just sounds awful and everyone hates it, but I do it because I love it. That same guitar that I hack away at and sounds dissonant and terrible in the hands of a skilled guitar player can make beautiful music. So it's not about the guitar, it's about the player. And I feel like enablement's not that different, that enablement under the wrong leader, it doesn't quite work. It doesn't quite sound good. But a different leader, different player, so to speak, of enablement function can do amazing things. And I think it comes back to what you're saying in terms of the kinds of projects you give enablement, how you use enablement, how you measure, like all those things. It's about the player, not the instrument. And so I feel like it's the two together can do great things, but they have to work together to really make good stuff happen.
Yes. And I think you also have to be honest. So one thing I say to enablement leaders when they're looking and even for me when I'm looking for my next job is does this revenue leader are they open to change? Are
Mm,
they open to working with enablement in a different way than they have in the past? Because you can be the most amazing strategic enablement leader in the world, but if you've got a sales leader that just doesn't want to leverage enablement in that way, you're not going to succeed. So there are some environments that are just not conducive to success. And um, my take on that is if you're in that situation, find a new one.
yeah.
Because you're too good and you can just push against that wall for so long. And that's not the right thing either. So, yes, it's the guitar and the guitar player, but they both have to be willing to make that change. And yes, as the enablement leader, you have to show up and you have to be able to show that you can make change and you can be really strategic. And it is going to take time to earn their trust, but make sure that person that's sitting across the table from you is also willing and open to change.
Yeah. And what a good segue. So I want to the phrase we used at the outset was a seat at the table.
Yes.
And so let's unpack that a bit. So from an enablement perspective, what does it mean to have a seat at the table? You talked a little bit earlier about just sort of like you're almost like a chief of staff. Let's go a little bit deeper of like, what does that mean? Why is it important? Like, go deeper on that, please.
Yeah, so a seat at the table to me means that you're not just receiving direction, that you are actually asked to problem solve with your peers. So go to market, we all know it's a team sport. No one is doing everything. There is marketing, there's RevOps, there's the sales leadership, there's customer success, there's support, and then there's also, of course, enablement. Um, Enablement a lot of times doesn't often get that seat at the table, and it could be for two reasons. One, it looks like a support function. So everyone else is going to sit at that table and make decisions, and then they're going to tell enablement what to do. Hey, you need to go enable on a product launch. The other situation that happens quite often is when enablement reports up to a RevOps leader. That RevOps leader, who oftentimes is a phenomenal RevOps leader, doesn't really understand the power of enablement or can't speak on behalf of enablement, but they're the one representing enablement in those situations. And so you have to really think about how you get a seat at the table. So when the discussions of what is our annual plan next year? What is our strategy? You need to be at the table actually helping them with that conversation. Um, and I'm going to throw out one other idea here that I think is really helpful to this is show that you understand the field.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the easiest ways to get that seat at the table. And I've done this at other organizations. My last company, I did this at HighSpot, which was how do you get the field to tell you exactly what's going on? And how do you have that ear to the field? And so we created the Revenue Advisory Board. And it was a group, it was a group that you actually had to get nominated into that came out to our offices 4 times a year. And we spent 8 hours with them. They got executive insights. So they got to meet with our executives. We did a fancy dinner. We heard from them. We asked them questions. And then we had this great report out to the executive team on what's happening in the field. Here's what we're actually hearing. Here's what we're actually seeing. And this is how it compares to the data we're seeing that's in the CRM. And that gets you a seat at the table because when they're doing their annual planning, someone's going to ask the question, do they actually know how to do that? And they just don't want to? Is this a will or a skill thing? And they're going to say, you know what? I remember Kelly and her team had the revenue advisory board, and I believe they asked that question about this topic. Why don't we have Kelly come in and present? Suddenly you're at a seat at the table presenting this very vital information into annual planning. And once you're there and they see the power of what you can offer, you're going to be invited back into that room. And so find those little moments to really show the power of what you do to get you invited back.
I'll take a more tactfully even stripped down version of that and say you want to show that you know stuff that they don't know. You can provide
Yes,
insights for
totally.
them. So whether
Yep.
it's a structured couple times a year we all gather and that's more of a forcing function for gathering stuff and then speeding it back, or just when you're in the one-on-one or when you're passing them, show them that you know things that they don't know that is valuable to them. And those little nuggets, to your earlier point, they start to paint a picture of Kelly knows my field and she knows things I don't know about my field. Those were good insights. I need to pull her in. And so whether it's formalized or informal, I don't think it matters, but I think again, the whole notion of earning the seat at the table, I think it's part of it. Just you know stuff that they don't know. You can educate them about their people, and that's a very powerful position to be in.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think the one risk or mistake I see when people actually try to go do this is they hear one thing and they go bring that up to leadership
Mm.
as a trend. And so be really careful about the thing you know that they don't know. Make sure it's actually happening at the right level. Um, if it's your worst account executive complaining that they don't have the right collateral, is that relevant? Probably not, because they're your lowest AE and they're probably just complaining because they're not hitting their number. If
Right.
you've got a mid range AE who's so close to being able to hit their number, but they're clearly just missing a couple things, that's really important information. And so if you hear it from one person, go ask others
Yeah.
so that you're stating a trend versus just, oh, I heard yesterday in the field.
That's a very good point. So one data point does not make a trend. I think that's
Yeah,
exactly good, and we can't, shiny object as enabler see something
totally.
jump on it. And I think the better thing, like you were saying, is I've listened to a bunch of gong calls over the past month, and I'm noticing something. Can I share that with you? So that's sort of
Yeah.
it's I'm listening where you're not, and I have a kind of a broad base of information on which I'm forming my hypothesis.
Yep. Agreed.
All right, so that's what the seated table looks like, and earning it is by providing insights and being valuable. So, getting back to the real world a bit. So let's walk through a couple of real world scenarios because again, I want people to be able to see themselves in these situations and how to work with it. So here a couple very real world things. I was talking to somebody a couple of years ago who I was working with, and we were talking about he how often he's meeting with his CRO. And he said, I haven't met with my CRO, who's his direct boss, in like 7 months. And my jaw dropped. And he's like, oh, he's busy. We're going through acquisitions and he's got a lot on his plate and excuse. So I think that's probably an extreme example, but I do think it's probably very common. It's hard to get the meeting. So I guess if you're in a situation where your direct boss, you can't get on their calendar, or they keep canceling, what suggestions do you have for keeping that seat at the table where it's not just even a seat of the name only, but you actually have that seat?
So, first question is, does it matter? So, the reason I ask that is I've been in a lot of organizations where that CRO maybe is not the one actually making the decisions.
Hmm.
That person delegates to their direct reports. And so it might be okay that you're not meeting with them. And I know that's a little bit of a provocative statement,
Yeah.
but actually, some of the areas in my career where I've had the most growth, I reported to the CEO and they barely spent any time with me. But I was so ingrained with my peer group that it didn't matter. And the reason I bring this up is the second way you solve for this is you get very ingrained with your peer group.
Hmm.
If you're not getting enough time with your CRO, the way you get their attention is your name is coming up with the people they are meeting with all the time.
Interesting.
So your peers in enablement, I often think are more important than your boss because those people need to trust you explicitly and they need to know what you bring to the table and they need to trust you to help them succeed in all of their goals. And so if you aren't meeting with your boss, that's okay for now. The way you're going to get there is that you're going to meet really regularly with your peers and make sure that your name's being talked about with your peer group. And so whether that's the VP of sales, the VP of RevOps, the VP of marketing, those people are your best friends. Make sure that they understand what you're doing, the value you're bringing to what they're doing, and that you're bringing them insight that they don't already have.
That's an interesting strategy to kind of work with all those other people who are in their ear. And I do think, it is, maybe this goes without saying, it is incumbent upon us to make sure we have a very clear agenda and we're concise and we're not just sitting down and checking in, that we have here are the four things I want to accomplish today, and being like, just very, very wickedly efficient at moving through that list and making sure you're ticking off things that are a priority and that are worthy of their time. And if you're wasting their time, then they're not going to give you time. And so I think you have to be wicked efficient. And and I do think if you have things on your list that you've got to go over with them, they have to make a decision, and it's their decision, or you need their support for something, or whatever it may be. I think you can have a very pointed thing like, "Hey, I know we haven't spoken in a while. Can I get 15 minutes? I have three things that I want to talk about with you, and here they are. And can we
Yep.
grab 15 minutes during lunch or go on a walk or whatever it is? Like, just can we carve out this for these specific reasons?" I think the more pointed you are, it makes them realize, oh, this is important, and I'm a blocker. I'm a bottleneck in this process, and they'll try and solve for that. So I think that's that very point. Hey, I need 15 minutes for these three topics versus a regular one-on-one. And so I think if you don't have the regular, which I still think is the better solution, but if you don't
Yeah.
have that, then be very pointed and direct and efficient in how you're working with them.
Yeah, I also think when you're doing that, make sure you're not the person complaining.
Yeah.
And
Actually, what
so,
do you mean by that? Sorry, I don't want to assume anything.
so I often think, or I've seen when people finally get that meeting, they're so frustrated
Hmm.
that they have been, and they have so much they want to say in terms of everything they've accomplished.
Yeah.
And they probably also want to vent a little bit about everything that's going on. And so, to your point, I think you need to come in and be like, here's what we've accomplished. It's in your inbox. I'd love for you to read it. Just a couple highlights, this and this. And then I've got three blockers that I would love your help with this, and this. And so you're coming in, you're able to share your success, but give them a way to go look at the deeper dive of that. But then just to your point, just say that there are three blockers. I need help with these. People love to help. People like to be needed.
Yeah.
And so that's a great way. I think that's a great strategy.
And sadly, this is it's a very common thing, right? Just I can't get time with with my boss, for all for legitimate reasons. They're on deals, they're traveling, whatever. But I think we can't let that be the excuse of not getting our jobs done because then we look bad.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to something you said earlier. The other scenario that I think about a lot is I don't report to the CRO directly. I report maybe to ops, and so how do I get a seat at the table? Because in the scenario I'm giving, the CRO is the one with power. They are the one who we need to be our allies, and maybe our RevOps person they don't understand our world. They do the best they can, but they don't understand it. How do I handle the situation where I am, cut off from the CRO?
Ask. I know that sounds so simple. But one thing I don't always see happening, or the excuse I hear often, is they're just taking my work and presenting it for me, which it does happen.
Sure.
And and sometimes it has to happen for efficiency. But you should be able to have the honest conversation with your boss to say, hey, I put a lot of time into this upcoming project. And I think it would be really good for my career growth if I got an opportunity to actually present this myself. Would you be open to that? If they are a boss worth working for, they are going to either say, absolutely, or hey, maybe not for this project because of XYZ, but let's do it for the next project.
Yeah.
And so it's simple as, and as women, we sometimes struggle with this. You have to just ask for someone to be in your corner and to get you the seat at the table.
Yes. And I think I didn't say this before, but part of there are two downsides to this that are top of my mind. One is, like you're saying, like I don't have the exposure with the CRO. My work is being presented by somebody else. I'm not getting the credit, and that stinks. And so I think there's that kind of career management image component. But also, what also is very true is we've all been kids that play the game of telephone. We all send a line, and every whisper is the same message, and by the end,
Yep.
it gets totally perverted. I think the same thing can happen here as while what you give them is in your head and on paper, but their ability to present it the exact same way to answer the questions crisply and accurately and have the details gets harder the more it's removed from you. And so I think there's this game of telephone that also happens that can be dangerous. And so I think for all those reasons, yes, you want to definitely ask for those things. And I'll add something that I've seen work a few times too. When I talk to candidates who are interviewing, and they'll say, "Great company, I love this." However, it reports up to RevOps, and so they're like, I kind of it gives them pause, and rightfully so for the reasons that we're saying. And what I suggest sometimes is, you know, ask to report to the CRO directly if you can. And sometimes they can make the accommodation, sometimes they can't. And if they can't, what I say is, I think the ask you want to have as part of your hiring process before you kind of sign the agreement is find a report to the VP of RevOps, but you want to be part of the CRO's Monday morning meetings.
Mhm.
Just not direct report, but you're there to listen and to maybe share, and you're part of those meetings because you offer, in theory, a different point of view and different insights than the RevOps person might. And so it's an ask that costs them literally nothing,
Yep.
but can unlock a lot of value for them. So I think to your point of just asking, I think before joining, that's I think a very reasonable ask to make a suboptimal situation a heck of a lot better.
Yeah. I think as enablement, we know the power of what we do. And a lot of that is understanding what's happening around us. And so you do need to be in those meetings. And so I love the idea of just asking ahead of time within that interview process. I've also been in the situation where it was actually at my last company where I wasn't invited to the forecast meeting. And it
Mm,
wasn't because they were excluding me on purpose. It just, they didn't think I needed to be there. And so I had to go make the ask and say, hey, I need to hear what the VPs and the directors are saying about why these deals are slipping
yeah,
and why we're winning them. Because I can go then and look and gong and see if A, is this stuff accurate? Do we have a trend here? Can we problem solve this? Is there a skill deficit? Is there a process deficit? And if I'm not in the room hearing those discussions, I can't help you. I can't do my job effectively. And of course, there was immediate, like, yeah, absolutely. You're welcome to the call, adding you to the invite now. But I had to go in and have the, like, here's why this is important. And they don't, the other thing you have to remember is when rooms get too big, they often get ineffective. And so they're not oftentimes trying to exclude you because they don't think you're valuable. They're just trying to keep the room small.
yeah.
And so you have to be really clear why your ask is very important and maybe different from the other people who are just trying to get into the room because they know there's a lot of executives in there.
Yeah, your point is the right one, and I think it's worth emphasizing is connecting those dots. So it's not just I want to be in the meeting; it's I want to be in the meeting because I want to be able to connect what's happening in forecasting versus what I'm hearing on the gong calls, and where is there a breakdown that's happening as part of we go from deal conversations to forecast, and so I can action that. I can start to figure out where it's breaking down, and then help provide some whether training or some programs or something to help fix that gap. I think that why is so essential, and so I think your point's a good one. So let me also ask, and some people might be sensitive on this topic, but so some people also might report up to instead of CRO or instead of a RevOps person, they might report out into marketing or HR, and we can have a separate discussion of why the pros and the cons of each of those things. That's a topic for a different day. But to our point of how do you have the seat at the table when you are not even part of the revenue organization? What are your thoughts on that? What have you seen work effectively?
Oh, that's a hard one. So here's what I'll say about reporting up through marketing. That to me means two things, one or two things. One is that they think enablement is just about product and product launches and getting the field ready for product launches. So that means there's likely a misunderstanding of the organization and what your function and remit is. So there needs to be some discussions around that. The second time I often see enablement reporting up to marketing is because they don't know where to put you. And the CRO or VP of sales says, I don't have time for another direct report.
Yeah,
Ops says, I don't know anything about enablement. And so the marketing leader gets stuck with enablement. And I say that in the nicest way because that's how they feel. They know that they don't understand enablement either. I've talked to so many marketing leaders that call me frantic and say, I just got enablement and I don't know what to do. I'm so scared because this is an organization that A gets blamed for a lot of things and they now report to me and I don't know how to manage them. I don't know what their remit should be. I'm overwhelmed. And so in these situations, you have to make the best of it. I think it's okay to have a conversation with the sales leader because they should be your peer and your best buddy in this world. You're an advisor to them and say, "Why do you think marketing is the best place for me?" What's your concern about having me report to you? And start having those discussions because I do think the marketing fit for enablement is literally just because no one else knows where to put you. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that, but I really honestly do think that's what that is.
And I've seen some a few thoughts on this because so much is the world that I live in. So, and I've seen people who are marketing leaders who historically might have owned it in the past, therefore they make a play for it. And again, sometimes it can work. We're talking in generalities. There are places where it works under HR or
Yeah.
marketing. It all can work. I think we're talking just broadly speaking where it typically works
Yeah,
best.
totally.
And so I had a person report up to marketing, and that marketing leader, said they were a big fan of enablement. And when I was talking to the enablement leader, she said, "Hey, Dave, guess how many times I've met with my boss, the CMO?" I'm like, "How many?" She's like, "Never once. Not one-on-one had ever happened." And so they were out there just truly just flying around blind with literally no leadership. And to pull a couple of these threads together, I do think your point was asking the revenue leader, "Hey, what are your thoughts about me reporting to you, or what's the resistance, or what you're thinking?" I also think there's also a pull to the push component, meaning, what if your ask is, "Hey," going back to before, "Hey, I know I'm reporting up to marketing. It'd be really helpful for all of us if I were part of your Monday meetings. And so just
Yep.
I won't, I just want to absorb what's happening there. I might share a few things. Can I just be part of that thing? I promise I won't be annoying and I won't do these things." If you get the seat and slowly over time, you start to offer insights, I'd be willing to bet that person would say, "Huh, I want those insights a little closer to me." They'll make a play to pull you over to their org because you're offering them something net new that they're not getting, and they want to pull that in. They want that de facto chief of staff. And so I think if you're not ready to make the big ask, I think you can set the stage for the ask by starting to kind of seed the ground with some insights and some exposure and some good experiences. That tends to make it more feasible because, to your point earlier, nobody wants the angry, annoying, pain in the butt enablement person. So they don't know what they're getting. So if you get some exposure that this person's smart, they know their stuff, and they don't talk just to talk, they offer like smart insights. I want more of that, not less of that.
Yeah, and I think if you are under enable or if you are under marketing HR, do the same tactic that I mentioned earlier, which is get to know your peers. Your
Yes.
peers are your sales leaders, your ops leaders, and create those connections with them so your name's coming up because you're providing value to them as well. So I think that's huge. The other thing that I love when it comes to planning around enablement is you're a neutral party. And when I say you're a neutral party, it's not that you don't have a point of view. You have a really strong point of view on what the organization should be doing, but you're not just doing what marketing's doing. You're not just doing what the sales leader's doing. You're not just doing what RevOps told you to do. You're the person that's going to bring all of those people together to help them prioritize what should be focused on. And so when you act as that neutral party with a point of view on, hey, okay, here's the 10 priorities I'm hearing from all of you. We as a group need to decide where enablement actually focuses and where you all focus on behavior change for the organization for the next quarter, next year, whatever your planning period is. And by getting those groups of people and you're the one bringing them together to make those hard decisions, you're suddenly earning that seat at the table, but you're showing that you're not just aligned to marketing and just going to do whatever marketing tells you to do or whoever your boss is. I frustrate your boss. I've had moments where my boss has been like, "Hey, Kelly, you report to me." But you have to say, "Yeah, but I have to do what's right for the business." And that is prioritizing as a group and prioritizing as a go-to-market, which includes marketing.
Yeah, and this may be apparent to some, but not to others. So I'll make this explicit. Just because you report up to marketing or HR or some other place, it's not your get out of jail free pass for building relationships with the field, right?
No.
You can't use it as an excuse. You just can't. And so it's harder, the bar is higher, it takes more intentionality and effort to make it happen, but you still got to do it. And so you can't take your org chart placement as your excuse for not doing your job. And building those relationships is your job. Agree?
Yeah, totally. And you hear from, and this is another generality, so I know this is not happening in every organization, but you hear from a lot of sales leaders that I don't hear from marketing very often. And if you can be the person in marketing that is throwing out your hand for the handshake and actually listening to the conversations and getting embedded in the organization, the revenue organization, you can help the rest of the marketing team learn how to do that really well and effectively. So there's a huge opportunity there. Again, not all marketing organizations, but I've been on stage enough to talk about the relationship between enablement, sales, and marketing to know that there's enough of organizations out there that really struggle with that.
Yeah. And if everyone historically zigged, you get to zag. You can be
Yeah.
the different one and give offers them a hand, like you said. That's it's a good thought. The other scenario I wanted to run through, which is very, very common, is the sales organization does not necessarily respect enablement as a function. Maybe the last leader wasn't strong and put some poison in the well. They don't like it. They don't respect it. It's for any reason, regardless of whose fault it is. And now you're inheriting this organization that it just doesn't have people's respect and trust, which you said earlier. And so, therefore, when there's these big decisions, big initiatives, big problems, you're not part of the discussion. Is your advice any different on getting a seat at that table?
Totally. And I think in that situation, you need a rebrand. Think about yourself as your own brand, your team as a brand. And in that situation, you write yourself a charter. Again, you write yourself how you are going to do things differently, what you've done in the past, how things are going to operate differently. And then you show it by action, whether that's putting a bunch of one-on-ones on individual sellers' calendars to hear from them, connect with them, say, hey, I've heard it hasn't been great in the past. Tell me what you liked and what you didn't like.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then immediately show that you're listening to them. And so, one way I've done this is at SKOs or those bigger enablement moments. We always had a slide in the deck or at the beginning of any session that was voice of the field. And we
Mm,
say, we heard from you this. So this is how we're addressing it. And you remind them that you're doing what you're doing next because of
mm,
feedback you received from them. And it immediately starts connecting with, okay, they're changing things. They are doing things differently. And I do recommend call it Project X, Project Revamp, whatever, Project Elevate, whatever you want to call it. But I do think there's power behind having a rebrand and naming it something so that people can connect to what you're doing as a bigger thing than just instead of 2 hour courses, we're going to do hour-long courses or whatever it is. Like really think about how you brand the change of the organization.
I think there's so much good stuff in there. I'll just pull a couple of those threads because I think you're saying some really important stuff. I think, what I really heard is own the historical dysfunction, meaning kind of give it a
100%.
name, call it, say like, hey, I know it's not working or hasn't worked historically. And so just kind of owning that it's not that it's from your point of view, things weren't going great before. So kind of own that and acknowledge it and put it out there. And then to your next point, you were like, why not? What's been good? What's not been good? So listen and get some of those nuggets. And then the second part of what you said, which I think was so important, which I'll change the word slightly to say, with what you heard, get some quick wins. And
Yeah,
ideally wins based on what they had just told you, but get those wins because again, back to your thing earlier today, you have to earn trust, and that takes time and experiences and data points. And so the more of those things you can do even early on, and ideally based on what they had told you, that's the stuff that says, all right, this is a new world. This is different from before. I can feel it, and then you get to lean into it. But I think to your point, if you don't rebrand and relaunch and reimagine, then you'll be perceived as an extension of what happened before.
totally. I want to throw out one other scenario because I've seen this scenario and heard a lot of individuals deal with this scenario is Well, the old enablement leader's still in the business. They moved to marketing. They moved to RevOps. Oh, they're now a sales leader. So I can't just go out and say, sorry, that was awful. I have to be really careful about how I go about this. Totally fine. You know what? You're in the luckiest situation in the world right now because AI is taking over and the way we enable is different. The science behind adult learning has changed. And so the way you can do it in that situation where the former leader or team members are still in the building and you don't want to create animosity there is say, hey, the way we enabled before was the way we had to because of the circumstances, because of XYZ, because of the technology we had, whatever reason you want to say. And they did the best they could. But luckily, we have some new science and we have new technology via AI. And so we're going to think through how we modernize our approach. Instead of changing it, optimize, modernize, use other words so that you're not throwing them under the bus, but you're also giving an opportunity to do the rebrand and make sure people know that it's going to be different than it was before.
Yeah, good point. The rebrand does not have to have judgment involved in it. So using neutral terms like accelerate or optimize or
Yeah.
whatever is fine. And even your first question was, what have you liked? What have you not liked? That's a very neutral question, right? It is gathering data. It's all
Yeah.
data. And so I think no one has to be thrown under the bus. If they're gone and it was really bad, I think it's helpful to kind of acknowledge the big gap of like, I know things are an issue. Please, I want to hear. But I think you don't have to throw people under the bus. I think it's a good point, especially if they're still in the business.
If they're still in the business, and you also have team members that worked on those previous projects.
Right.
And so you have to be really careful with the way they think about the work they produced in the past. And are they ready to make a change or are they going to be a little bit resistant? And how do you soften that for them as well?
Yeah, I was talking to somebody yesterday, enablement leader, and they were saying a new person came into the business as the head leader at the VP level, and the rank and file not so happy. And so, you know, point being, a lot of them may be loyal to the old way, not so the
Totally.
new way. And so I think it's a very easy way to lose a lot of friends in your org by throwing people under the bus. So I think enablement is a role where EQ is very important. So I think this is an example where
Oh,
having
it's our
the EQ
superpower.
it's a must. And so uh, be careful. But I think the bigger point is the idea of rebranding, reimagining is really important to help delineate what was from what will be.
I love a start, stop, continue exercise if you've ever done these with your
Mm.
team. So, just like you're listening to the field and hearing where they are finding challenges and what's working and what's not working, go to your new team and say, let's do a start, stop, continue. I want to hear what you all love you're doing, what you want to stop doing because you don't think it's effective, you think it's a waste of time, or what things you want to continue doing. And so if you go on any of the tools, I think Zoom has templates for this. I'm sure the other apps do too, but it's a start, stop, continue exercise where you actually get together and whiteboard and put up sticky notes. And as a new leader, then you're going to get buy-in that the changes you're making are because you listen to them, not just because you're coming in and telling them what to do.
Thematically, I think listening is a big thing for us today, as it should be. I want to take this into my world directly now as a recruiter. So, seat at the table, we've established is very important for success for you, for the organization. It's essential. When you're interviewing, how do you suss that out, right? Because if we're saying it's important that I have one, so is it possible to assess that before you walk in the door, before you sign? Or is it you just learn once you're on the job?
I really think it is. And so a couple things I will look for is who's on your interview loop.
Hmm.
If you're just meeting with the main sales leader and maybe one marketing person, that's a little bit concerning.
Yep.
And so think about are the people on your interview loop the people in the level you think you should be partnered with? If they're not, huge red flag, ask the recruiter about it, ask the hiring manager about it. Ask what meetings you'll be a part of. Okay, my predecessor, what meetings did they sit in on a regular basis? Okay, annual planning, how were they involved?
Yeah.
And ask those questions, get the answers. I think the hardest thing about enablement right now, Dave, is that most organizations know they're not doing it as effectively or leveraging it. The better word is leveraging enablement
Sure.
as well as they should. They know they need to get better. And so they're going to say the things that you want to hear, which are, yeah, we've had enablement for a while. We want to grow the team. We want to invest in it. We want to make it better. Okay, great. Those are all great things to say, but how do you make sure it's true? And you make sure it's true by saying, okay, what meetings am I going to be in? How am I going to get access to XYZ? For annual planning, will I have the ability to get these people together in a room? And so ask those harder questions so that you can get insight into that. And if you're coming in as an IC, an individual contributor, ask my manager, how is my manager involved in these conversations? How do they work with you? It's very, very telling. I think it's really hard right now because so many organizations have big thoughts and ideas of how they want to leverage enablement, but they don't actually know how to do it. So, A, propose and see if they bite.
I like that. I have so many more questions I want to ask you, but I want to be mindful of the time and keep it not too long of a conversation. I want to wrap up. We covered a lot of ground today, but I'm curious as we think back on just the concept of getting a seat at the table. What are the must dos to earning a seat at the table in your mind?
The must do's are be a super reliable and trustworthy resource to your peers. Number one, make sure your peers are bringing you up in conversation because you are so helpful to everything they're doing. Bring new insights to the table is number two. So make sure you're thinking about how are you listening to the field? What insights are you bringing from gong calls or wherever it is that they might not be aware of, and how you're tying that to business outcomes? And then number three is just having overall empathy for the organization and how you bring all of those three different teams together and understand that they all have different KPIs. So knowing that what marketing's being goaled at is different than what sales is goaled at, and how can you be the person that brings those two things together and create seamless goals between the two?
I love it. Kelly, thank you
Of
for
course.
the conversation, the insights. I think, again, this is a really important topic and one I don't know that's talked about enough and strategized enough of how do I earn it or keep the seat at the table. So I think this is a really great discussion. I really appreciate you sharing so much with everybody today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having